Most people use pre-built React frameworks. They just take their pick and live with the consequences. It's like, can I get a number 3, please? Can I have a create React app, please? Can I get Next.js with a side of Tailwind? But it doesn't have to be this way. Take back tech. We can build it ourselves and be in full control. This is React from Scratch, a video by PageKey. So why even bother with any of this? Well, at PageKey, it's all about taking back tech. I think the future is all about empowering individuals and communities and folks like that to own their own infrastructure, customize their own software, and of course to help others do the same. As an example, imagine a world where Apple decides to start charging you to use emojis. There's an emoji tax. Every time you hit an emoji, you pay a little emoji toll. What are you doing about it? First of all, can you stop them from doing that? Not really, it's their tech. So there's a ton of outrage. Everyone's angry, investors are angry, stocks are dropping, but they're doing it anyway. What's your response? Do you just never upgrade your phone again and have terrible out-of-date security stuff and eventually lose access to things that you use every day? No, I think a better solution is to use Apple. Don't get vendor locked where you can get vendor bullied. Just own the tech. And Android, you're not safe either. Google is watching. By the way, the slides that you see are made with pure React. I'm working on getting better at the motion graphics and the text and all that stuff and how to automate it, so I'll make a future video about that. Also, typically I edit out silence as much as I can to save your time. I received some feedback that I go really fast with these videos sometimes, so I'm making an effort to slow down and talk a little more slowly. If you want to follow along, the blog article and source code for this whole video is on GitHub in the folder you see here. So what are we talking about today? We're starting completely from scratch. Empty folder, no files in it, and we'll build our way up from there. We'll create some very simple React components and then show how we can take those React components and get them to display in a browser. That will involve compiling with Esbuild, creating an index.html to import our compiled JavaScript, and finally adding npm run build and npm run dev scripts so that we don't have to remember long CLI commands for Esbuild. So let's get into the initial setup. Start out with an empty folder. We will make a directory called my app. We will cd into that folder and we'll create source and dist folders that we will need soon. Next, just make sure Node.js is installed on your system. I won't tell you how to do that for any number of different computers and operating systems you can have. I just know that for Nix, if you paste this shell file here and type nix-shell, you'll be good to go. So part 2, simple React components. Let's make 2 components. One will import the other and use hooks, use state, so that we know that all of that, importing and hooks, work. Here's the main component. As you can see, we are importing another component into this one from homepage. Then we're defining our app or root component. That's just a function. Inside the function, you can see we are using the useState hook, and then we are rendering the value of that hook along with a message. And at the bottom, you can see where we are injecting that React component into the actual HTML page, into the DOM, by selecting the root element by ID and rendering it out. Here's the second component. You can see we have an import for React, even though we don't use anything from that import on the page. It turns out you have to have that import on the page somewhere, or else it won't recognize the TypeScript syntax for some reason. I'm not sure why. Then we just export the default function for this module to be the simplest React component you could possibly have, just displays a message. Next, we will compile these React components with Esbuild. So we'll need 3 packages to get that job done. You can npm install them now. Esbuild to do the compiling, and React DOM, which are imported in our components. Let's make sure that we don't accidentally commit things to Git we don't want. Add node modules to your git ignore. Also add dist to your git ignore. This is where we'll put our built files. Now we're ready to compile the component. So all you have to do that is to run npx esbuild source/index.tsx. And what npx does is basically runs a shell in the node environment so that esbuild is linked in as an executable. It's kind of like Poetry Run, if you've ever used Poetry. It runs it inside of a little npm virtual environment, if that makes sense. I ran this on my side. This is what it looked like. It was actually pretty short. It's only like 10 or 15 lines, which is refreshing. However, where is that hello world message from our imported component? I didn't see hello world anywhere in there. It should be a hard-coded string somewhere, right? Esbuild actually expects you to compile or import that component separately by default. Well, that's pretty inconvenient. However, there is a -- bundle flag which will resolve the imports for us, including the React import, and pull it all into one file. To do that, just run npx esbuild source/index.tsx -- bundle. I'll screen share real quick and show you where you can find that hello world message in the bundle output. So if you open up the My App folder on GitHub, you can test this out yourself. We'll run that command with the bundle flag, and it's massive. You can't even scroll up far enough to get to the top. You can see comments in here for where these things came from, whether it came from React, React DOM, or our source file. It tells you exactly where each one. And would you look at that, there is a hello world message, and it tells us exactly where it came from. So the whole compiled source for our homepage in vanilla JavaScript is right here. It's comforting to see it, isn't it? And here is the other one that we saw previously. So we see it's dumping everything to the console window. That's not super useful. Now if we add --out file, it'll put it into a .js file, and that will be very handy in just a moment, because we're going to create an index file to import our compiled JavaScript, and then we can open that index file and see it in our browser. As I just mentioned, we compiled into plain old JavaScript. How do we see this thing in action? Well, we create index.html, and then we import our bundle.js. So create the public folder first. We don't want to store index in dist, or else it'll get lost. So now we'll create index, and this is what it looks like. It's very simple boilerplate. The key piece here is that we're importing bundle.js, and we have a root element that, if you remember, we are injecting our components into. Next, copy index.html into the dist folder. We don't want index in dist, or else it'll get accidentally removed. So just CP it over. For now, we'll automate this soon. And now we can run a quick dev server in Python 3 m HTTP server from the dist directory. I'm sure there's a way to do this with Node.js, so we will refine this process in future videos, but hopefully you have Python in your system and you can just do this real quick. If not, you're on your own. Once that's running, go to localhost 8000, and you should see your component rendered. I can show you what that looks like on my end now. Here we go. All right, we ran it, and you can see the result here in our browser. I can zoom way in, and yeah, that looks good. Our root element got populated, so good stuff. Next, let's make our life just a little bit easier by creating some npm scripts to automate this. So add a scripts section to package.json. It'll look like this, and you can add a build script. I split this into 2 lines. It's actually one very long line, but we're calling Esbuild. We're giving it a loader. Maybe that's necessary, maybe it's not. We have our bundle flag and our out file, as we discussed before. Now all you have to do is type npm run build in your terminal, and it will run the exact same command as Esbuild. If you want to add watch, you can auto reload on save. So we'll add this dev command, and it's based on the build command. So we actually run the exact same command as npm build. We have this double dash to indicate that we are adding some additional arguments at the end, and we will add --watch and --source map, which is nice for debugging. Now all you have to do is type npm run dev, and you'll have a pretty decent dev server sitting there rebuilding your code as you make changes. It'll watch for when you save files. You do have to refresh the page manually, but it's a start. If you add the minify flag, you will notice that the built JavaScript file gets much smaller, up to 10x smaller, at least from my observations. Obviously, it's a pain to copy index.html, and if you happen to change it, you might forget to do it. So we should add that copy command to our script. It's actually pretty easy. You just add cp public index.html dist, and this is really just a shell script, so you can add ampersand ampersand and then the rest of the command, so that this all runs as one big continuous command. And there we go. Everything we need for a duct-taped React framework. It's definitely not pretty, but it does get the job done for now, and we can make it better soon. But that's all I had for this video. We wrote some simple React components, compiled them with Esbuild, created index.html, ran it in the browser, saw those components, and then we added some npm scripts to make our lives easier. Next up, custom build scripts will really allow us to streamline this process, and you don't have to rely on CLIs having the right options for you. You have the full power of Node.js for all the customization you could possibly want to do. Later, we'll also talk about React SSR, or server-side rendering, and SSG, or static site generation. It's a little tricky, but these 2 techniques are super helpful, and if you know how to do them yourself using Esbuild, all the better. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to Take Back Tech. We have weekly videos to learn new tech topics, we learn about self-hosting, and we love rebuilding things from scratch to figure out how they work. See you there.